Hello and welcome to Yells at Cloud, brought to you by the finite physical limits of cloud computing. I'm Gunnar, joined this time by Danielle Heverling, Matthew Bonig, and Chris Ferris. All four of us were recently at the AWS Heroes Summit. We would love to tell you what happened, but several lawyers and at least one NDA advised us to stop talking about it. So we'll stick to things we're legally allowed to discuss, like AWS power consumption, AI agents, and I guess the slow collapse of civilization. Danielle, what is something that you've built or tried recently that had nothing to do with work?
Trying to get into sports,
Yeah.
oddly. I've been watching PWHL, even though it's currently off season, but getting into women's hockey, and it's a pretty cool time.
That's very cool.
Did Brian LaRoe talk to you?
No, he
LaRoe?
actually did not.
He
But
talked to me a
yeah.
lot about women's hockey during the summit. We had a very long conversation about it, and I'm trying to figure out a place to stream it here in the States.
Man, now I'm mad I didn't talk to him about that. That would have been awesome. But yeah, watching Seattle Torrent's my closest team, so by default, I'm now a fan.
Very cool. Matthew, how's life on the road?
Good. We're currently kind of in Danielle's neighborhood in Tillamook, Oregon. So we've been having a lot of fun going to the cheese and ice cream tours around there. And after this, we're going to head more south to be in San Francisco by about the end of September.
All right, Chris, first time on the show. Welcome. You are an AWS security hero. But
that's correct.
The note here says that it's only because AWS or Amazon PR department didn't greenlight a villains program.
I mean, if you've seen my blog where I talk about how Security Hub gives me imposter syndrome and cloud encryption is worthless, so don't use KMS, you could see maybe why that they would have a little bit of angst about giving me the title.
All right, so we have a lot to get through in this episode as well. And Chris, we're going to let you kick things off.
Yeah, so I think the big news in this space since the last episode was the fact that 3 major labs have had AI agents effectively escape containment and attack companies on the internet. And so we first heard about this from a company called Hugging Face. They're kind of like a GitHub for open weight models, who announced and reported, we're being attacked and we don't know how, but it's definitely an AI. And coincidentally, none of the closed source frontier labs can help us. So we had to go spin up open weight models in our, environment that we host, cha-ching, to defend ourselves. And shortly after that, somebody at OpenAI is like, wait a minute. And they kind of fessed up that, oh, wait, maybe that was us. And it looks like what was happening is they had either a model that they were fine-tuning, reinforcement learning, or maybe even a model that they were just doing capacity training on. And yeah, models will find a way, and models are very determined. So it discovered how to escape through the only thing it had access to, which was an Artifactory repository. It apparently started learning swarm behavior like the velociraptors in Jurassic Park, because then it started leaving messages for other agents. And suddenly they became a pack, animal, pack agents. And then, just used the used Artifactory's capabilities as a way to go off and attack Hugging Face.
I didn't know it was through Artifactory that they got the escape vector. I thought they just had a full-blown internet connection, but they only had access to Artifactory and somehow hacked Artifactory for remote code execution?
They were being responsible and had sandboxed these agents. And so the agents obviously needed to get packages, but Artifactory was kind of set up to be that proxy. So if the agent needed something, it would get it from Artifactory rather than, getting it from the internet. So that was the only thing the agent could really talk to. And it was doing something called exploit gem, which I guess is sort of like a Kobayashi Maru experiment where it's trying to find exploits in some software. And the model was like, I can't find this. How would I get the answer to this? Oh, let me go see if I can steal the answer key. And it presumed that Hugging Face might be the source of the answer key, which is why it decided to go after Hugging Face. So now you've got agents with pack behavior, absolutely ruthlessly deterministic, determined to do it, figuring out that, well, I can't actually solve the problem, but hey, I can go find a 0-day in Artifactory and use that to pivot out to the internet to then go after a company. And so that was kind of the Hugging Face one. And then I think shortly thereafter, there was another release from Anthropic. And what I saw most recently on the Anthropic one is, whereas the OpenAI agents were engaging in collective pack behavior, the Anthropic agents were engaging in cutthroat behavior. They were competing against each other. So they were trying to sabotage the other agents. Now, could very well have been just a difference in the experiments, or it could just be a difference in what's going on inside those crazy models.
Isn't this all just marketing then? Isn't it kind of what we've seen over the years from these labs that, oh no, we can't release ChatGPT because it's too dangerous, and we just see this over and over again?
I would say there's an element of that, but usually I don't go out and issue a press, because I usually don't go out and issue a press release saying, hey, my tool has hacked somebody. Because usually that follows with, hey, I'm getting sued. Yet, right, there is some of that. On the other hand, it happened, right? And I think, my take is OpenAI was incredibly negligent, not in the fact that they allowed the agents to escape the sandbox, right? That was kind of one of those things where life finds a way. We should have assumed that the dinosaurs would, with frog DNA would, turn males into females or whichever happened. Rather, they weren't watching what the agents were doing to be oh, look at that. Now they're communicating with each other. Oh, hey, wait, why are they, trying to find the answer in Hugging Face rather than solving the problem that they were tasked with? So that's really the where I see the fault lies, is the companies are not keeping an eye on their experiments. They're just letting them run loose, and, it's going to be dangerous for all of us.
The timing is way suspicious, though, because it's OpenAI, and then all of a sudden Anthropic's wait, us too.
No, we can do that too.
Yeah.
I think Google is the only one we haven't heard from, right?
Google's
Gemini
a whole nother story. Gemini couldn't break into Google.
Well, you'd have to have good enough telemetry to know your agents are attacking somebody, to actually be able to admit to your agents attacking somebody. So.
Yeah, and I could see why that would probably be a very hard thing to trace. I mean, it's one thing to sit there and watch the context window and see what's going back and forth. It's another thing if they hacked Artifactory, you've got to sort of have monitoring and tracing on that, and things like network level logging to know that's happening, and especially if they're tagging other agents. If those other agents weren't within the purview of their sandbox environment or their testing environment, I don't know how you would track that. It's a crazy story about how this actually took off, and I don't know of a single person who would have come up with a strategy like this, and yet AI was doing it. It's probably the best argument for AGI out there.
Yeah, so there were two Artifactory hacks. The first one was the 0-day, and I guess there was some kind of message board in Artifactory, and they were just doing a standard message board thing. And then OpenAI did notice the message board, and so shut that down. And so then they started figuring out that through some kind of like web DAV technology, they could create directories. And so they started sending messages to each other in the names of the directories. And that's like a level of persistence and just really, really bad human user experience that I don't think any of us would ever be like, screw it, it's not worth it. But it was perfectly fine for them because they had the tokens and the patience to do it.
Yeah, super interesting. I guess, and in this case, it is happening under the control of the AI labs, but what if an agent or a model starts behaving like this when someone else is running it? Who's responsible in that case?
Well, so that's like sort of the interesting question, right? Like, so in the 20th century, when we were messing around with splitting the atom, right? This was governments in control of how that worked. So there was a certain level of discipline that happened with the US and the Soviets and the Chinese and the French and the Brits around like building out a nuclear program. Now, and there was only one nuclear program for the United States. It wasn't like there were 4 nuclear programs all competing with each other for market share and everything else. Now, right, we've got technology that may be as dangerous, but rather than being like a government program, it's random Silicon Valley VCs that are all fighting with each other for market share. And, plus the international element where you may have, other nation states trying to build their models. So it's just a matter of time before this falls into the wrong hands. I would say the one thing about these attacks so far that is different from what you or I might have access to is these were pre-release untrained models without any classifiers on them preventing them from like doing bad things. The models were intended to be do as much as you possibly can to understand the emergent behaviors.
So are classifiers added at the model level or more like at a harness or an API level?
They sort of they're some of it's baked into the model itself, but it's really kind of like almost a mini AI that sits in front of the main model. So if I say, hey, Fable, go build me a nuclear bomb, even before, okay, the user wants to build a nuclear bomb, gets to the main model, something else says, wait, nuclear bomb, no, that's forbidden, and deflects the request. And part of that is to just prevent prompt injections and other things. So the classifiers, they're in the inference stack. They're not something you can bypass easily. You would have to get the raw model from Anthropic and OpenAI, and those really aren't available to anybody other than probably Amazon and Google and Azure, who are third-party inference environments for these companies.
Or an open weight model, which you could run locally and skip all that.
Where open weight models become interesting, right, is these open weight models may not have the same classifiers or, like their classifiers that will exist in the inference environments, regardless of what model you're using. So I probably couldn't ask DeepSeek, help me build a nuclear bomb in, Amazon Bedrock. Because Amazon will have a, let's not let our users build nuclear weapons classifier. Now, if I had a beefy enough computer, in my data center or my garage, then yes, I could possibly get the model to help me with that.
All right. So the labs are now saying that the models are escaping containment. And I guess the next story then is basically, what if we gave the agents a desk, credentials, and a monthly subscription? Danielle, what's up with the latest bots out there?
Yeah, so this one was interesting to me. So for the audience, Cursor's a pretty big IDE that a lot of folks are using. Agentic, all that. I think it may be a VS Code fork, one of the many, but they were acquired by XAI, which means they get Grok, the model, if you all remember from a few years ago on Twitter/X. I won't go into too many details, but you can Google it. But essentially, they released a thing that they're calling Grok Bot. And essentially, what it looks like to me is it's an app that you can download Mac only, which seemed pretty limiting. But you can create agents. It kind of looks like a bunch of Telegram messages. You can create agents and give them access to, whatever you want to give them access to. I believe they use plugins. So if you wanted to be able to check your Gmail, Slack, stuff like that. And then the one thing that's kind of interesting about these kind of workspaces is the fact that you can train it or you can set it up so the agents can talk to each other. So it's kind of like you're creating your own team of autonomous building. And with Grok in particular, you do have to be on a higher cursor plan. I think the 200 plus model to get access to this. But it also each bot has its own compute that is remote, XAI or wherever those servers are, maybe even on AWS. I have no idea. But the thing that I think is cool about this is the fact that, if it's remote off your computer, then you can shut your laptop and it's still working in the background. But yeah, I've definitely noticed a trend of these kinds of multi-agent workspace type of things, because there was also more recently with AWS, Kiro Crew, very similar. And then also, I think that was called Hermes. Has anyone used that? Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And there's also Gitkraken's got Kepler, which I've been using for the last couple of weeks, and I really like. It's nice.
Yeah. So it sounds like what you're describing is hosted OpenClaw with jackboots. Right?
Yeah.
Like, 'cause it is that, and it's collective too, so it's more agentic, and with sub-agents than OpenClaw was, but it sounds like it's an OpenClaw kind of thing.
Yeah, that would be a good way to describe it. A less YOLO version of OpenClaw. Though since this is yelling at the cloud, I guess this is yelling at AI. I don't really trust anything that has the Grok name on it, so I will likely not be using this.
I wouldn't touch it with your computer.
It seems like it is yes, agents marching in jackboots in lockstep, saluting their
They had a great opportunity to call it something else, but no.
not his ego won't let him.
True.
It
Yeah.
will all be Grok. I can't even use the term Grok from the Heinlein novel. I feel like every time I use the term Grok, I'm like, can't, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like overall, I like the idea of where these workspaces are going, and bonus if my remote compute can be my own compute, because I believe Kira Crew offers that. You can point it at a EC2 instance or something in your home lab, which is awesome, especially for enterprise, because I don't want hosted agents running on someone else's compute. But yeah, I'm not quite sure I'm fully evolved yet enough to be here's my, digital keys to my kingdom. Agents, go do a bunch of stuff for me. I'm not sure I'm quite there yet.
Yeah, it can't, no.
What kind of task would you be comfortable giving away then, Daniel, at this point, where we are right now with these agents? Email?
Create a bunch of burner accounts. I
Yeah.
think that's the only way I would trust it. But even then, that's not really helpful, because then I have to fill in all my data in those burner accounts. Maybe limited access to my personal GitHub, and then have it do some coding, but that might be about it.
You see, it feels like many of these are built to basically have access to everything. So that's when they're meant to shine. They're supposed to be able to do anything you do, more or less. But yeah, I don't know anyone who would trust them with that at this point. And especially given what Chris just talked about as well.
Yeah, I've got some colleagues who are going pretty hard on a lot of the automation. I got a coworker who has he calls it his team, and it's Claude, Codex, and a few others that he'll throw a problem at and then tell them to go fight it out for a while and then present results back to you. And it's interesting, but there's definitely a part of me who's getting really burnt out on just talking with AI and having pure AI content on everything that happens now. It's getting a little tiresome feeling like I'm talking to robots more than to people anymore.
There's definitely an element of, okay, I could have AI argue with itself to solve a problem, but at some point I actually want something to get done. And whether it's like finding tickets to the Portugal-Norway game nearby, or, booking tickets, figuring out what stocks I should trade, right? Like all of those things, I have to give the agent way more agency to my life than I trust them with right now. And so that's where this kind of falls down is, there's certain decisions that I still want human in the loop. Yeah.
Yeah, same. The way I use agents mostly more autonomously is research, more or less. Tell it to look up information about something, then it works for a while, and then it's over to me again. So,
Yeah.
No trust, I guess.
Yeah, but for that, I'm just like consistently asking it questions. So more of an interviewing kind of iteration than, I think once I said, go write me a report on the fall of feudalism in Western civilization, and it came back with a big old thing. But every other time it's like, well, tell me about this. What happens if that? And then, dive deeper into this.
Yeah, I actually wonder if companies are trying to move towards I remember back in the day with Amazon Alexa, and they wanted people to order off of Amazon with your voice. I kind of wonder if that's where all this is leading, is all these companies being like, I have an integration with, OpenClaw or Grok Bot, order stuff from Target. It's super easy. But for me, it's scary because that's my credit card and
Yeah, well, and I mean, remember, somebody having a news report about the kid who said, Alexa, buy a dollhouse. And suddenly, right, there was something in there, and 1,500 dollhouses got ordered because the device heard that on the news report.
So I guess the scary part about these types of autonomous coworkers is what they can access and what they're able to do. But I think the less obvious question is where all of this compute, because we're now talking about agents, we're talking about models all the time, where can all of this physically run? And what we've seen recently is that even Amazon is having trouble finding that room. There was a report in Business Insider very recently that the retail side of Amazon, the e-commerce division, is executing a massive infrastructure restructuring program that they're calling Region Flex, due to a bunch of power constraints and data center capacity shortages that are driven, I'm sure, by this AI boom. The retail team is now shrinking its infrastructure footprint in several of these big AWS regions. One is Dublin, Ireland, for instance, and they're planning to then downsize in Northern Virginia and Oregon as well in the coming years. So Amazon is now splitting workloads across smaller, underutilized regions like Frankfurt in Germany and Zaragoza in Spain. And I think this is super interesting because the cloud obviously has always been one of the things we've sold cloud with, is that it can scale more or less infinitely. But we're now reaching the physical limits of cloud. So in Ireland, for instance, the report said that data centers are consuming 23% of the nation's entire electricity grid. And that was in 2025. I'm sure it's increased since then as well. So they're now having to ban new data center grid connections unless the provider itself, like Amazon or Microsoft and so on, bring their own on-site power generation. So these cloud providers like AWS can't build capacity fast enough now to both serve the big, I guess, enterprises using AI and the retail parent, Amazon. So now Amazon retail is forced to spend a lot of money on migrating off of AWS regions. I think that's super interesting to see this play out.
I think it's to some extent, right, their customer obsession, right? Like, go to reInvent and the Amazonians aren't allowed in the room. So yeah, now it's like, oh yeah, Amazonians are not allowed in the actual AWS, which is fascinating.
Well, I wonder if that is where it comes from, or if it's the other way around, that Amazon is starting to actually see these issues with capacity constraints and doing it as a way to actually make sure that their customers, the retail customers, aren't affected by it.
Yeah, because I don't imagine latency would be an issue then at that point if you're sitting there and have to ship a workload over to another region. That you'd never do that with like normal database calls, the typical API work, because you're always concerned about latency. But with AI, you're not really generally concerned about latency because it's so slow anyway. So it makes a lot of sense to sort of distribute these things about. And I'm wondering how long before AWS just releases a new service, which is multi-region Bedrock. You just say, here are the regions I want to hit. Here are the ones I want to go for. You figure out which capacity to run it on.
Isn't that kind of almost the case already with you pointed to US, and it doesn't really matter which region the model is available in.
Files, right? That I can say, I want to use, Claude 5 in EU, and whether it's Stockholm or Frankfurt or Ireland or Spain, right? It just infers wherever it wants.
Yeah.
But
and that
to a particular endpoint in EU Central 1.
Exactly. So
okay, I don't use Bedrock, so I didn't know that actually still existed for Bedrock.
And I'm sure that didn't come from it being a neat feature. I think it came from just capacity constraints.
Yeah. Well, capacity constraints and some level of need for data residency requirements.
Yes.
Yeah. Some of us can't necessarily infer in the US.
No, exactly. Yeah. I think this is super interesting when they're forced to make these moves. And I'm sure a lot of AWS customers have also run into these things that I think Bedrock is the easy one to see that there sometimes are capacity issues, but it happens with other workloads as well at this point.
So you said something about how they're doing it for AI, but I didn't see that in the article. So is it like they're distributing their AI load, the retail AI loads across multiple regions?
No,
just all of their workloads.
As far as I know, it's about all the workloads.
Yeah, which actually makes sense, right, from a regional availability perspective too, right? Like, we saw a region literally get blown up, and so having the ability to distribute your workloads, and honestly, the great thing about Amazon and AWS is Amazon is a cloud computing company that runs a bookstore as part of the operational earnings of running a cloud provider. So the fact that Amazon retail is figuring out, okay, how do we better distribute, means that not this year, but probably next year, we're going to have a lot of really interesting reInvent presentations around how to do multi-region architecture more efficiently and better, which in my mind is a good thing because, there are only a handful of really powerful regions in Europe, and many of them are within drone striking distance of, a non-friendly country. And we've already seen that country's retail giant getting hit. So yeah, I worry about the regional stability of some of the regions in the US.
Yeah, no, super interesting to see this play out eventually as well. But I think an interesting thing in that report as well was it said that Amazon is expecting a infrastructure cost increase of 10 to 15% as well. Because Frankfurt is more expensive, for instance. That's just a fact. All right. So yeah, Region Flex. I think it's going to be interesting to see that playing out. And one of the reasons was, of course, that Amazon and AWS doesn't have enough power to be able to build out these regions quickly enough. So what happens then when the answer isn't to move to another region, but just like they said in Ireland, build your own power plant? And that's kind of what's happening in Texas right now, Chris.
Yeah, so apparently the world's most polluting data center is getting built by Amazon in Texas, which of course made me like, Texas? Which region is that part of? So yeah, Amazon is quietly trying to build the biggest gas power plant in the US. Basically they've acquired permits in Texas for an AI data center powered by a 7.65 gigawatt gas power plant. The plant is not going to be connected to Texas's grid, which is probably good for availability in the data center. And yeah, so if we're yelling here at cloud and cloud providers poisoning the air and killing polar bears is probably a darn good reason to be yelling at the cloud. But really my question is, Texas? What's going on there?
Tax.
Like, is this a
Probably
new
tax benefits.
Say again?
Probably taxes.
Could be taxes, but like, okay, so is this a new region? Is this some kind of center? Are we going to see US South 1 shortly? You know, what's going on with buying out in Texas rather than closer to one of the existing regions where, you know, power is greener?
Yeah, interesting. I guess my first question is, what happened to the climate pledge? When you look at this,
Oh yeah, that thing.
Yeah.
was that 20
It's
net
all
zero by
fighting for
2040?
market share. Yeah, the climate
That was
went out.
so 2019. You
It
know,
was so
They're
2019.
moving it back. It's 2050 now.
So, fun fact: we do. My company does a bunch of well-architected framework reviews for clients, checking out on stuff. When we get to the sustainability portion, the pillar of the well-architected framework, we always skip it with our customers because we have never once ran into a customer that had any sort of sustainability concerns when it came to workloads and green energy and any of that sort of stuff.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess what's interesting to know is this a genuine change in strategy because it is a different world now, because it is different from 2019, or is net zero just in the end flexible accounting, so this number doesn't really matter much?
I thought I'd heard about a bunch of Amazon and others looking at building nuclear power plants next to these data centers, which I'm a proponent of nuclear. I think it's a great form of energy production. What surprised me is that this felt like when the AI crash happens and everybody suddenly realizes we can't be losing, 70 cents on every dollar to this technology. What's left after that crash? Well, in the dot-com crash, it was servers, networking, infrastructure, that sort of thing. In
Lots of
08, it was, what's that?
Lots of dark fiber.
Right, exactly. There was something that we could reuse afterwards.
Mhm.
Same thing in 08. Like after the 08 crash happened, housing became incredibly affordable. I just sold a house that I had bought in 2010 because we got an $8,000 check from the government to go buy a house in 2010. AI chips can't be reused for anything else. I can't go buy an AI chip and go slap it in my computer and play Grand Theft Auto 6. It doesn't work like that. But putting a nuclear power plant in Texas to power AI data centers for a little bit, and then when those collapse, tie that into the Texas grid and fix Texas's energy problem seems like a nice byproduct of this. So if they're going and they're doing this with gas fuel and one of the worst out there, that's incredibly infuriating because we have an opportunity, I think, to do this better, but we're not. Apparently,
we do.
collectively, we're not.
It's a matter of time, right? How long is it going to take to permit and get a nuclear plant up versus, I can go and do gas within, however long it takes to get the machines that are needed. Yeah.
Which is insane. So I've got a friend of ours who was working with solar plants to build. Basically, it was solar plants and solar collection farms on top of greenhouses, and they have to fight for years to get permits because every time they want to build somewhere, there is all of this ecological study that has to happen to make sure, oh, you're not going to put this someplace that's going to hurt the migratory patterns of Canadian geese or things like that. So it's insane to me that they can just blow past. And that's probably why it's Texas. I bet you Texas laws for this thing are incredibly lenient for just saying, oh, yeah, just go build whatever you want to. We don't care. It's a desert anyway. And that's probably why it's Texas more than anyone else, because they can do it in a short amount of time. Anywhere else would probably take them years to do it.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's kind of why this is happening. And those small nuclear power plants, I think they are still years away from becoming reality.
Sure, but let's think a little ahead instead of just what can be done in the next year. Then again, we've only got about a year of runway left, and then this whole thing blows up and collapses anyway. So
yeah, shareholders don't look years ahead.
We can't have a model gap.
All right, so we've gone from models escaping their sandboxes to Amazon escaping the power grid. We're going to take a short break before someone builds a data center on the moon, and when we come back, it's time for burst mode. All right, welcome back. It is time for burst mode. Danielle, you're up first.
Yeah, so my burst mode item this time is focused on NVIDIA. I believe it was a week or two ago, they released a new open weight model. It's called Nemotron Lightning 3.5. And at first, I was just interested in it just because there's a lot of arguing in Silicon Valley about, open weight versus the frontier models. It was mostly just like OpenAI and Anthropic versus everyone else and all these manifestos and please US government subsidize our businesses, kind of stuff going on there. But this model itself is actually quite interesting to me because it kind of changes some of the mindset and the reason why you think about this. Because usually when you think like open model, you think, oh, this is just a way that I can get cheaper compute, or like I'm just paying for compute. I'm not sending, millions of dollars to Anthropic to pay for tokens. But this one has kind of like a different mindset to it. So like traditionally, usually it's like we have our agent, it calls, some sort of frontier model, usually like GPT-5 or Claude, and then that model does every single operation. The way NVIDIA is pitching this is maybe we should change our mindset on this and go from having a frontier model running every single operation to having it be more broken down. So it would be like you put in your prompt, you have a model router, and then you have, your frontier model that does all the, the hard thinking and reasoning. And then, I don't know, just on the right here, you have a model for, smaller, very specific tasks. And that's where this Nemotron Lightning fits in, is kind of more for like the small, specialized tasks. And they're pitching it as a way to save money and just kind of to utilize your resources better. And I found that kind of interesting. And then also just kind of thinking as well, since this is open weight, like if we could just, download this model, use it, if it makes training, a smaller specialized model easier too. So it just seemed kind of interesting, like a little different. But I think we all know, just since this is Yells at Cloud, that NVIDIA makes their money no matter what. So I think they just want people using AI. I don't think they care if it's open weight or if you're sending money to Anthropic or whatever, because no matter what, I think NVIDIA is the big winner here.
Oh, for
The
sure.
only winner.
But, yeah.
People who got
I
rich
guess,
in the gold rush were the ones selling the shovels.
yeah. And the
Yeah.
GPUs are definitely the shovels. So has there been a Nemotron 3 and a 2? Will there be a 4? I don't know if I would dare to jump in and start using this and bet the future on it.
Yeah, I was wondering if eventually, because if you look at like the Claude Enterprise plans, like those are way more expensive than like just employees expensing like a Claude Max. I wonder if at some point enterprises, assuming they have the resources, which they may or may not, might move towards, the enterprise Claude plan to like having a dedicated team to, have these types of open weight models. And then they utilize that and then they just pay for, wherever their compute is, which if we're being serious, it's likely AWS, maybe GCP.
A lot of companies are using something like Open Router, which kind of like allows you to pick your model and it just goes and infers wherever it feels like. And sometimes that can be cheaper if you've got the AI engineering team. But not many companies are there yet.
Open Router now bought by Stripe, by the way.
Yeah,
Ouch.
that's a wild one.
Yeah.
I
Super
didn't know
interesting.
that.
Yeah, so the Stripe with their Stripe projects, I think they've been leveraging Open Router, so that's been part of it. Basically a way to build your applications that obviously will somehow use Stripe for payments. And now they own, I think Open Router even called themselves the Stripe for AI models, and now they're owned by Stripe.
Interesting.
Smart marketing.
They're those things remotely the same, but
It's all
NVIDIA
about pushing everything through it. So
I was going to say, NVIDIA also released a router around the same time. I think it's called SwitchYard. And I don't think it's a coincidence that it came with this model around the same time.
yeah. I mean, it would allow me to put my inference across a whole bunch of tiny accounts that have very low, quotas for using Bedrock.
Yeah. All right. So NVIDIA wants to make models more available, but the question is what we are willing to consume to build them. Sometimes that means electricity and gas, like we talked about, but sometimes apparently it means the books. Chris.
Yeah, so this comes from a news article from 404 Media, who seems to be the most interesting and subversive media organization in the New World Order. And apparently they put some tracking devices in a bunch of packages that contained what they called rare books, and then watched to see who bought those books. And they apparently were able to track these rare books back to an Amazon facility. And they talk about how there's a team at Amazon that is, dissecting the books to, ingest the data to trade it into models. And of course, this 404 Media article was about Amazon, but, Anthropic has been called out for doing that. And it's ironically, they're destroying the books because of copyright. There can only be one copy of the book. And so by digitizing the book to use it for training, they must destroy the original, which I think is definitely a very unfortunate side effect of trying to do the right thing and make sure that creators are in fact compensated for it. But really what makes me wonder is like, are we seeing a new Library of Alexandria here all over again, where we're destroying all of these books, thanks to unbridled capitalism and Silicon Valley fascism, and we're losing information that won't be available to future generations because, the hard drives crash or the AI data centers go bust and the companies go bankrupt. Now the books are gone and the information is lost. So yeah, you can't reconstruct, the works of Shakespeare out of the vector models. So that's my big concern, is that these books that we're destroying are lost to time and not available to future generations.
Yeah, it's horrible.
Would the reaction to this be, well, I guess, better if Amazon was open about doing this? Because they've obviously done it in secrecy.
I mean, somewhat in secrecy. I mean, if you go to the news article, there's a whole little sticker for the team that's doing that.
True.
It's a big picture of a velociraptor eating a book. So yeah, they're doing it in secrecy, but they're also somewhat, at least internally, proud of what they're doing.
Yeah, probably not an external.
Yeah, no. I mean, I definitely
logo.
don't think the image, cut through AWS PR. But I don't think if they were being more forthright about it, I think that it would be better if maybe they were preserving the book in some way, shape, or form so that it's not physically destroyed and we no longer have the paper copy that can be read in, a few generations' time.
All right, so that's one way of training your models. I want to stay on that same topic, how to actually get data to train these models. So Twitch quietly introduced a default on opt-out setting that allows Amazon to scrape streamer content, meaning live videos, video on demand, clips, chat logs, and channel images to train their generative AI models. So thousands of angry streamers confronted Twitch's chief product officer, Mike Minton, live on stream. His answer to this was, if it's opt-in, nobody would opt in. That's the honest answer.
Oh yeah,
And
we've heard that from AWS on other stuff too. Yeah,
yeah,
it's annoying as hell.
I think it's masterclass in corporate gaslighting. When the executives openly admit that we know that you hate this, we know it steals your creative work, and we know you'd say no if we asked, so we just did it anyway. I think it strips away the illusion of consent in the cloud era.
Which is wild to me because I can't imagine what value there is in Twitch streams. I don't understand, like, why would they want that information? What can they train off of that's useful in any meaningful way? Unless they're going to start creating a bunch of AI streamers and just replicate what, I don't even know who popular streamers are anymore, but just emulate and create virtual AI streamers. I don't get it. And I thought AWS was getting out of the AI training space. I thought they were kind of backing away from that. We haven't seen anything from Nova in quite a while.
I'm going to answer your question with a question, Matthew. Have you ever tried the Nova models?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're awful.
So
they're garbage.
Yeah, exactly.
Like I tried using it a lot in a game that I was building last year to generate artwork for pixel art. You simply cannot do pixel art style graphics. Like I spent countless hours trying to get it to work, and I hate their models. But they were extremely cheap, so I was going with them for a lot of things.
And
our credits work with them.
This is why you don't let Gen Z Fortnite kids train your models.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And what's also super interesting is that the opt-in, opt-out toggle is an optical illusion. When I read this, first thing I did was to go to Twitch and try to opt out. A few minutes later, reloaded the page. Well, I was opted in again. It didn't change.
That feels like a big problem.
I had to do it multiple times before it actually stuck. I also tried other settings on the same page. No issues with them. But that single one,
Are you a paid Twitch streamer or a non?
Just a free account.
I'd say, well, if you're not the customer, you're the product. And so I'm surprised they even let you opt out. But
honestly, that's a great point. Like, I'm surprised that for free accounts, like this is going to be one of those premium things I think a lot of companies are going to start doing is like, hey, if you're not paying us to use our stuff, we're going to use your stuff for AI and you don't get an option anymore.
Yeah. No, I'm true. I think that's true.
It's the evolution of the ad model. It's now there's so much value in AI training data that's going to be the new ad revenue model.
Yeah, it's just unfortunate for those streamers that they place their whole livelihood on a platform like this, and then I bet you a lot of them are going to lose viewers because you can't trust the platform. And I guess that goes back to we should all just go back to RSS and have our own websites.
Heck yeah.
I do.
Well, now anybody can just build out, go ask Claude, go spend a weekend building out a Twitch clone. And we're getting, I think, to the point where some of these big providers like this are going to have to be concerned about it. Now, AWS doesn't care. AWS is still going to make their money because if you built your own Twitch clone, you'd be running it on AWS anyway, probably. So, okay, they're probably fine either way. But yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing the downfall of Twitch, to be honest.
I think it's already started too.
And I'll disagree with you. I would put it on Oracle where egress is free rather than someplace that's charging me 9 cents a gig.
Alibaba?
Vercel. I can do everything on Vercel, right? I can spin up a whole streaming platform on Vercel, right?
Doesn't Vercel run on AWS?
It does.
Probably.
Yeah. So Jeff wins in the end anyway.
He always wins. He always
Jeff
wins.
and NVIDIA.
Yeah.
So, Matthew, I think we have a recurring topic on the show now, apparently.
Yes. Okay. So last episode, I talked about CloudFormation Express Mode and why I don't get who this is for. And at the summit, I was talking to some people, both within AWS and outside of AWS, and I had kind of an epiphany. I finally figured out who this is for. Okay, so let's talk about, I created these diagrams and I spent a lot of time doing it. So I'm going to make everyone look at these. So this is the sort of traditional CloudFormation type process. You have a change set and you start executing it. And when you're done executing the change set, you can go ahead and start doing all of your testing and everything else like that. So I call this the anxiety zone. This is when a change set starts until it's done. Like I'm tense. I'm sitting there going, okay, is this going to fail? Is there going to be a rollback? Is that rollback going to succeed? Does everything go out? Is something happening within that change set that causes a momentary outage as things flip back and forth? I don't know. These things are insanely complicated now. So let's just hope. Okay, so what does Express Mode do? So Express Mode just simply shortens the time in which the change set says that it's executing, but things aren't really done yet. And there's this sort of like gray area now where between the change set is being done and the resources are all stabilized and everything. And that time didn't really exist before because once the change set was done, the resource is stabilized, everything should be ready to go. Now with Express Mode, I don't know when that is. So I don't really know when that testing process starts. I don't know when I can start hitting those resources and verifying that everything is working correctly. Now, in the documentation for CFN Express Mode, they say right at the top of it, like this is not meant for production. And in fact, there was some debates that I was having with people about they should have called this CloudFormation development. And I realized there is only one situation in which I'm going to execute a change set and I don't actually care when it's done because I'm not going to start testing when it's done. And that's production. So CFN Express Mode only makes sense to me in a production environment when I don't really care about it, when I sit there and I just fire things off. And at this point, I've run so many verifications through lower environments that I know that when it gets to production, it's probably going to run without a problem. So I'm going to fire it off and I don't really care when it's done because this system will just keep running the entire time. And I'm probably not running any automated tests when it's done because it's a production system. Automated tests almost always have side effects. So my hot take, my epiphany on this is that CFN Express Mode is actually only good for a production environment and is useless in a dev or testing environment. There you go.
Yeah, that is a hot take.
Yeah, I was not expecting this hot take. You surprised us here with your slides and takes.
I spent a lot of time on these slides. I tried to do it with AI, but it wasn't working well.
Yeah, I think my concern is like the lack of rollback. Like, how do you handle that with this?
So that was part of the conversation I was having with Brian LaRue and something he said, which is you can't in a sufficiently large system, there is no such thing as a rollback anyway. once a system is sufficiently complicated and you start to make changes to it, if there is a problem, in a lot of situations, you can't roll back. A classic example of this. So I've got a stack and it's got an RDS instance in it and it's got all this other stuff in it. And when I deploy that stack change out, if that RDS instance is going through a version change, so the version change happens, the RDS instance gets upgraded, something later in the stack fails, that stack can't be rolled back because that version cannot be downgraded on RDS from 15.12 to 15.11 or whatever it might have been. So in a production environment, in any environment really, if you have a failure, and especially if a rollback fails, but even if it doesn't, sometimes the only thing you can do is make another change and fix forward. So in a production environment, I don't think you're going to see it very often with failures because you should be probably running through lower environments with similar change sets. So by the time you get to prod, you're 99% confident that it's going to run just fine. But even if you do have a failure, that failure is probably going to be very unique for that environment. You're probably going to still have to do debugging. You're still going to have to make some sort of change to go ahead and try again, in which case your biggest question then is, again, you're in the anxiety zone. What's the state of my system? I don't really know at that point. So that's the big issue. Is that still an acceptable state for you and your deployment of not having a rollback feature? I would say for most people, probably. In a lower environment, no. Like in lower environments, you need to be able to roll things back because there are going to be experimentation features and things like that. But in a production environment, it's the only place where I see this actually being that useful. And it came to something, again, that Brian LaRue said, which is they're doing like hundreds, if not thousands, of deployments of CloudFormation change sets a day for their customers. And they really like having this feature where it appears to their customers and to them that change went out quicker. Whether or not that's pure marketing and sales tactics to say, oh, we just improved the speed of the system by 40%, or whether there's actual value in that, I can't say. But it's sort of this interesting set change of, well, what does it mean to be done, and what does that mean in a production environment, and how do these change sets be done in a meaningful way?
So what you're basically doing with Express Mode then is letting your standard observability monitoring take over. So once you've actually pushed it and Express Mode says that it's done, you're just waiting for the alerts to come in if there are issues.
Exactly. And that's something that in a lot of, especially mature systems, you're going to already have in place. You're going to always have those monitors that sit there and say, oh, there's something going wrong. Now, if you're doing things through like canary deployments, well, then all of these failure modes and everything would have been detected after the change set in traditional mode was already done anyway. So again, you still have to have some sort of procedure to roll new changes forward to fix the problem. So it doesn't really change anything when you're using Express Mode. And other scenarios, if you're not going that far with it, I still don't think this is a feature I'm ever going to use. Don't get me wrong. Like this is still kind of a weird thing to me, but it is definitely a case where there is one scenario now where I could see it being useful to people. Whereas before I figured out, I said it last time, like, I don't know who this is for. I just think AWS missed the beat on like who this was actually for. I think this is actually only for production.
It's super interesting. For production, I'm for
They'd
Brian
never
LaRue.
say that, right? They couldn't say that, oh, use this thing that's eventually consistent only for production, right? They want to hedge their bets. They want to put things behind shared responsibility and be like, oh yeah, only use this, in lower environments where it's not practical because, as you said, as soon as it completes, you want to start the testing, not,
Right.
we'll get around to testing, in some indeterminate time later.
Well, and this is the part that it's confuses me about this feature is AWS has a pretty well-known product development cycle, which is they get feedback from customers, they take that feedback, they go develop a plan for it, they implement the plan, they release the plan, and that's how you get your new products. I'm really curious who was sitting there saying, lie to me about when my resource changes are done. Now, of course, they're not going to say it that way, but like, were they asking for, hey, make CloudFormation faster? Because that's a huge complaint and something they've been working on for years. Hey, make CloudFormation faster. And the best answer they could come up with is, we're just going to lie to you about when it's done.
Yeah. Make it faster. Well, what if we lied to you? Would that be okay? And I was like, sure.
Make it. Yeah, let's make it more Terraform like. How about that? Let's make this act more like Terraform, which is what this is. This is Terraform's model for stuff, right? So, are they just trying to ape Terraform's bad design? Oh,
All right. So join us on the next episode when Matthew has a new take on CloudFormation Express
I'm
mode.
gonna love Express mode by next episode. I promise.
Exactly. All right. Those were the topics of this episode. Before we close out, I want to go through each and every one of you, and I want you to tell me one thing you are looking forward to. Danielle, starting with you.
Lunch with Matthew today.
That was gonna be mine.
Well, you can't have the same thing.
Mhm.
So, Matthew, then, what is your thing?
Lunch in Beaverton, Oregon, with Danielle, Farah, and a few other people.
All right. Chris?
All right. Well, I'll go with similar vibe, but I'm not going to be anywhere near Oregon. So in about 2 weeks or so, Forward CloudSec is hitting in London, and I'll get to hang out with a number of our AWS security heroes, other heroes, and just in general, hanging out with the cloud security community, who is absolutely awesome and is the best community to be part of, including maybe the heroes.
Very cool. So, and for me, then, I think it is that conference season is really kicking off now. So there's so many events coming up. And I guess the closest ones right now is AWS Community Day in Poland and AWS Community Day DACH. I think you'll be there as well, Chris.
I'm hoping for it. Gotta still have to book the travel.
Me too.
You'll
I'll
make
be
it.
there.
And Danielle
Nice.
will be there. Oh, yeah, I forgot, Danielle. That'll be fun.
Cool.
You just have to take your RV across the Atlantic, Matthew, and we'll see you there as well.
Matthew's going to get a helicopter or a private jet.
Something like that. Yes.
Something
Working
like
for it.
Transport plane.
All right, so this has been another episode of Yells at Cloud. With me this time was Matthew, Danielle, and Chris, and I am, as always, Gunnar Grosch. And thank you all for listening, watching, whatever you did. Thank you. Bye-bye.